Facebook.
Go to Chrome.
Go to Chrome. And then it'll say connecting video. Waiting for live video. Let's give it a second. Then hit go live. And pull up Zoom. Which one is Zoom? Okay. Well, we should be live now. So good afternoon to everyone who is joining us today. I'm Hiral Tipirneni, and I have a special guest today. Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes is joining us for a very timely discussion on voting rights and the upcoming elections. We'll just give everybody maybe another 30 seconds to hop on, and then we'll get started. Adrian, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Hiral. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so glad to have you join, and there's no better place than we can get this information than from our Maricopa County Recorder. So we really appreciate you being here. So let's go ahead and get started, Adrian. I'm going to just give everybody a little bit of an update on, things going on with COVID and so forth, and then we'll jump into the conversation about voting rights and the voting procedures and so forth. So first of all, thank you all who are joining. We're so glad to have you all here. Thank you for making the time. And this is the new way of staying in touch with everybody, right? The Zoom and the Facebook Live town halls and so forth. So we miss seeing everybody in person, but we're so glad that we have a chance to connect. Technology is our friend here. So thank you. As you all know, the current crisis continues. We are concerned about rising numbers. Just as a general update, I guess you would say, I want to let you all know that right now, worldwide, we have 2.3 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide, 2.3 million, and we have over 157,000 people that have perished from COVID-19, and that's across the world. 157,000. That's it's an unimaginable number. In the U.S., we have 723,000 cases, and we have over 37,800 folks who have perished from, again, from coronavirus. So we're having little technical adjustments here, sorry. But again, huge number, 37,800 folks who have died from coronavirus in the United States. And then when we bring it down to Arizona numbers, still incredibly terrifying. 4,700 cases tested positive, and 177 people have died. And let's remember, too, that we don't have the widespread testing that would suggest that these numbers are absolutely accurate in the United States, and certainly not in Arizona. So these numbers are underestimating not only how many folks who have the infection, but let's remember it's also underestimating the number of folks who have actually died, because the reason I say that is because there are folks who have died but have not been tested, right? They may have died from something else, and it's important to know that number because obviously that really tells us the extent of this. So the numbers are so devastating, and this is a perfect segue to just remember to remind folks to please continue to follow all the CDC precautionary guidelines. We want to make sure all of you are following all the appropriate ways to protect yourself and protect folks around you. We want to make sure that you are wearing masks when you're out in public. I know that we haven't laid down that rule as a state, but it has been suggested by the CDC that if you are going out in a public space where you're going to, even if you're 6 feet apart, as you should be, if there's going to be other folks there, like the grocery store, the drugstore, or somewhere else, you should be wearing a mask. Now, again, we're not taking away the masks from healthcare workers. We want to make sure, folks can make their own masks. They can use a scarf or a bandana, but the point is that we want folks to be protected. Make sure you're washing your hands frequently. Make sure you're all following your social distancing guidelines. It is so important that right now we all do our part, because everything we do as individuals impacts our entire community and impacts how this all plays out for our entire state and country. I just wanted to also let folks know that if you want sort of a more defined breakdown of the presence of coronavirus, the Arizona State Health Department website has a breakdown by zip codes. So you have sort of an idea of what areas seem to be developing hotspots. Just again, it's a reminder to folks to stay at home unless you absolutely have to go out, and that's assuming it's just for groceries or medication, or if you're an essential worker. Otherwise, you should be staying at home. Please remember those guidelines. It pertains to everybody. Do not take this lightly. This is incredibly serious. People are dying, and medical resources are being stretched, and we have to do everything we can as an entire society. I want to let you know that we are continuing to update our website with additional links and resources for folks to receive access to services that they might need, and also more information about how everyone out there who is able and in a position to can contribute and support other organizations that are reaching out to those who are really in need, whether it's food banks or housing or other sources. Maybe it's protective equipment. We'll have an update on our website, hiralforcongress.com, the COVID page. Please take a look, and if there's anything you can support and contribute to, we would be really grateful. It's such an important time for everybody to come together and support our communities in any and every way that we can. The last thing I want to mention before we go into our conversation about the election and voting rights and get Recorder Fontes in on this conversation is that we're hearing a lot of talk right now about reopening our country, reopening our economy. And I understand. I mean, I know millions of people out there are struggling financially, economically. I know small business are shuttered everywhere. I mean, we see that everywhere. And we don't take that economic impact lightly. I know that's a serious problem. But let's be clear that if we reopen if we ease up on our guidelines too early, we have the potential of having another whole wave of this hit, which will then prolong overall how long the economy is shut down. We have to hit some specific medical milestones, some benchmarks that have been agreed upon by virologists, epidemiologists, the folks in the front line. Those are the guidelines we should be using to decide when and how to reopen our communities. And that means slowly and moderately easing up on those social distancing and shelter-in-place guidelines. But again, that has to be about letting the medical professionals guide us. And that means having adequate testing. We are so low in our testing. We have to make sure we're aware of what the hospitals are going through with resources, with capabilities of handling the number of cases that come in, and making sure that we see a continuous trend line downward of new cases. And frankly, we have to have testing capability to test folks who are not symptomatic. Because if somebody's going back to work, if you're going to go back out and patronize businesses, we need to know that you are negative, that those store owners are negative, that those folks who are coming in contact with other people are negative. So we have to expand our testing, not just to people who have symptoms, but to people who are asymptomatic that may be in contact with other people once we ease up on the guidelines. Right now, we don't have the testing infrastructure to accommodate the level of testing that we need. And until we do, we cannot condone any level of easing up on our shelter-in-place guidelines. Again, I don't say that lightly. I know there's huge economic impact and repercussions. We just want everybody to be safe and healthy. And we want to make sure that when we do reopen our communities and our state and our economy, we're doing it in a mindful way. We're doing it in a moderate, step-by-step way, so that at the very end of the day, we know we've done everything to preserve safety and health guidelines for every single American. So with that said, I think we want to go ahead and now open it up. We would love to begin sort of the next portion of our conversation, which includes, again, Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes is joining us today. Thank you so much, Adrian, for being here.
Super happy to be here, Hiral. Thank you very much for the invitation, and hello to everybody out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so I wanted to start the conversation about just, why it's so important to be able to vote, move to the concept of voting by mail in this particular time. I mean, I think to me, I feel like it's very obvious. But if you'd like to maybe, reiterate some of the things that we've seen in previous elections with long lines and people sort of waiting in small spaces. We saw what happened in Wisconsin recently. Just kind of give us your perspective on the idea of expanding to all vote by mail, given our current pandemic.
Well, thanks so much for that question. And let me just put one big important soundbite out there. Saying all vote by mail does not mean that you only have one option to vote by mail. That's one of the pieces of the narrative that's going around out there from folks who don't want this to happen. It's, in fact, is the opposite. What it does is it gives us the right and the capacity to mail everyone a ballot. And you can still vote on election day. You can still come in and do ballot replacement whenever you want. We're going to have expanded early voting no matter what. So I want to put the mythology out to pasture as it is. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background first. What does it take to run a regular election in regular times? All right, let's look at that. In Maricopa County in 2018 for the general election, for example, we had 503 polling locations, and these are precinct specific, sometimes combined 2 or 3 precincts consolidated at a time. But in Maricopa County, with our 748 precincts, we had to do slightly more than 500 of these locations. Each location calls for at least 7 employees. Moreover, we have a layer of troubleshooters on top of those employees and IT troubleshooters as well. Plus, we have the control staff back at the back. We have logisticians, we have drivers, we have nodes of supplies in different places staged in case there's an issue at one of those 500 locations. It is a massive, massive logistical operation for one single day of voting, and that's just a bad idea. And that's one of the reasons why election day only voting, off the top, always has problems. It has always had problems in Maricopa County. It's always had problems everywhere. And we reduced a lot of those problems by the time we got to November of 2018, barring the issues in August. But we did really great. Now, add to that a global pandemic, you've got a different situation. So instead of having as many people in as many places, we want to reduce that as much as possible, just like we've all been staying home, just like we've been practicing social distancing, just like we've been doing all of that. We want to reduce the amount of exposure, human to human exposure, because you know this better than I do, since you're a doctor and I'm a lawyer, although I could probably sue on it, but I won't, is the question of each individual human being is a vector for transmission of this virus. You know that as well as just about everybody watching. And it doesn't matter if you're showing symptoms, and it doesn't matter if you appear to be healthy, you're still a vector for transmission. You carry it, you can give it to other people. And so we have to reduce the amount of person-to-person contact across the board, which becomes very, very difficult when you have a person-to-person activity like voting. Except that, as they've done in Oregon for 20 years, and in Washington, and in Colorado, and in a lot of counties, not just in California, but all across the nation in increasing numbers, and even here in Arizona, that we've done for literally decades. And now up to 75% of our voters are on the permanent early vote list. Voting by mail reduces, if not all but eliminates, the person-to-person interaction, which is our point of weakness in 2020. That's our singular point of weakness. And it's not just a security weakness, it's a health and safety for the individual weakness. Right. And so if we went to all ballot by mail, what we would effectively be doing is this. We would be reducing the number of face-to-face transactions, which is medically important. It is good for the health of our society. Now, how are we planning on doing that is an entirely different question. But the bottom line is this. Elections are very, very complicated. And ballot by mail elections are not simple to do. They're also complicated. You have multiple stakeholders involved You have multiple layers of regulation and laws that are involved, all have to be followed exactly right. And we know how to do it in the mail very well. In fact, the County Recorders Association of all 15 counties, the recorders, and the Election Official Association. So the presidents of both of those organizations put an op-ed in the paper last week, basically telling Representative Bullock and some of the naysayers, we can do this. Arizona's ready to do this. We've been ready for a long time to make the switch, and it's about time, particularly now. So unfortunately, we've got politics getting in the way, but the Republican Secretary of State in Oregon has told us it works well. Republican county recorders here in Arizona are telling us it works well. And so we're excited about the possibility of maybe making this happen for August and November of 2020, not as a permanent change, by the way. We're just looking at it for this year during the time of this pandemic.
Right, yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. So I want to add a few other points to that and just ask you about addressing. We know that there are certain communities, right, that are more impacted by voting in person issues, such as, long lines, limited polling stations, and so forth. I mean, we remember in 2016, the primary, I know that was before we had you leading the charge, but there were hours upon hours people were waiting, and those were, not the wealthier, more affluent communities, right? These were communities that had more communities of color. They were communities that were financially, obviously, more lower socioeconomic levels, but they had less polling stations. They had longer lines. So that's one issue I just wanted to see if you could address specifically, because I think in general, right, voting by mail would be very beneficial to me, it seems, for those communities overall. Although I agree that there's probably some sort of rate limiting factors in that. But the other thing is the poll workers too, right? The potential exposure to those poll workers, because it's not just about standing in line and potentially infecting the person in front of you or behind you. It's about the fact that we have amazing poll workers, volunteers, people who come out and give their time to this incredible act of democracy, and we are potentially putting them at risk as well. And so I think, as you mentioned, this may just be during these kind of crises, but it is incredibly important to think about this proactively, because if we're going to do this, we also need to do it sooner than later. But the idea that we could prevent, even a handful of folks perishing, I mean, those are lives we're talking about. That is not something to be, minimized. And at the end of the day, to think that somebody is risking their life by going out and exercising, their right to vote is just, it's unconscionable.
Yeah, Hiral, let me personalize this a little bit. There was a guy named Steve who was a DJ in Detroit and had come back out here, was living in Mesa. I believe he was either retired or getting close to retirement. And the last selfie that he took was walking into a polling place on March 17th for the presidential preference election. 6 days later, they found that he had contracted COVID-19 and passed away. And I hate to think that had I been allowed at that point to mail ballots out to those folks, that he might have just been able to bring it in and drop it off and leave. Now, I don't know that he contracted the virus there,
Sure.
But it is as possible as any other interaction. And you're absolutely right. Our poll workers are valuable to us because they only do this for a short period of time. They're temporary employees with us. But we also have county employees who help us across the board as well. They're from the Office of Enterprise Technology, from air quality, from animal control, from health services, from roads, from the water departments.
Wow.
All of these folks from all over Maricopa County, from the assessor's office, the treasurer's office, the court security folks, all of our county gets exposed if some of us get exposed. And to imagine folks getting exposed and then having to go on a 2-week lockdown is really, you're adding injury to harm. You're adding insult to injury there, and it gets worse. Now, what we're really looking at here is those poll workers that you mentioned, and I'm particularly sensitive to that because my mom's actually one of those poll workers. She's a retired school principal. She's let's just say she's a little older than me out of respect for her. But she's relatively healthy. She will not come back to work for us.
Yeah.
She just won't do it.
Yeah.
And I don't blame her,
right.
Not for 1 second. And she wants me to succeed. She wants this whole project to succeed, just like everybody else does. And we're not playing games here. We are dealing with something that is incredibly serious, and it is really unfortunate that some folks are playing politics with this. Now, that all having been said, we are working very diligently with our facilities and owners who are not the county. The county doesn't own the facilities, their churches, their schools, their shopping centers, and so forth. We're working closely with them and with the county health department. Obviously, the Board of Supervisors is a major stakeholder in this. They are our partner, and we really appreciate the support they've given us, even over at procurement, looking at getting the proper PPE and cleaning supplies that we need to make it happen. It is a big project, but it is a people-driven project across the board. And that's one of the things that really makes us so energized and so willing to face this challenge. But it doesn't have to be as severe of a challenge as it is now. As it is now, we're going to have to open polling places. We have no choice. We're going to do it anyway because we need ballot replacement centers. We need places for folks to drop off their ballots up to 7 p.m. on Election Day. But if we end up being able to, and there's still, hope springs eternal, there's still a few days where the governor could possibly give the county boards of supervisors the authority to let them decide county by county, which I think is appropriate. We may still be able to do it by mail, and that would significantly reduce the amount of human-to-human contact, which is really what we want. So lots of factors in here. And Hiral, if you want to get into any more of the specifics of the process, I'd be happy to chat about those too.
Yeah, I would love to get in a little bit more into the process. And as you and I talked about a little bit earlier, which I don't think a lot of people know about, is the possibility of sort of combining this, with all the folks who are on PEVL right now and being able, and for those of you watching, that's permanent early voting list. We have the ability to sign up for that, so we get a mail-in ballot for every election. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was close to 80% of the midterm voters in Arizona voted by PEVL. But that being said, that we can do some sort of combination of the vote by mail as well as the early voting, which would also significantly alleviate some of the worry and burden of people coming into contact and minimize the risk of harm or illness or anything else to not just the voters, but to the poll workers. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, I think that would be great. That was something I didn't know a lot about. I think a lot of our viewers hopefully can learn as well.
Sure, and thanks for that. So the permanent early vote list is really not that old. It's about 13 years old. It was created after the 2006 election by the legislature because at that point, 50% of Arizona's voters were asking for an absentee ballot for every single election. In other words, the county recorders would send out postcards to every voter, and then 50% of them would send a postcard back and say, I want to vote by mail. Now, that's 13 years ago, right? So they created a permanent early vote list to keep from having to mail back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So a lot of folks have been on that list from the beginning, and it's an increasing number. We're up to about 74, 75% of our total voters, that's the total voters, are on the permanent early vote list. But when it comes to turnout, that is the percentage of those total voters that actually vote. 80%, as you indicated, of our voters are permanent early vote list or early voters. And that means that turnout is higher if you get your ballot in the mail. You're more likely to vote. And that's a really, really good thing. It's great for our democracy to bring more voices in so that those of us who are in government can listen to the real voice of the people out there not just those few stalwarts, who are constantly in communication with their political parties or organizations, right? Let's listen to everybody. That's really the little d democratic ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right now, we mail out to 74%. We've been doing this for a long, long time. This is not new.
Mm-hmm.
That means only 25%-ish of our voters are not getting their ballot in the mail. Under the new model, we're hoping to mail it out to everyone. But at the same time, and regardless of whether or not we can mail it out to those non-PEVL voters, so this is regardless, we are going to engage in a very robust and very assertive early voting facilities campaign. We're going to open early voting in multiple dozen locations across Maricopa County, starting about 2 weeks before Election Day. And here's why. By opening up more locations, we accomplish a couple of different goals.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we'll be able to alleviate the pressure from Election Day proper.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the fear is we're going to have big crowds and big lines on Election Day. To reduce that, we're going to move a lot of early voting places, open up earlier, and get some of those voters in, because it's a lot easier to clean up after every voter, to have social distancing appropriate, if you've got much fewer voters each voting day, right? So we'll turn it into an election season of a couple of weeks instead of just one big election day. That will, again, alleviate the election day pressure. And that's going to happen no matter what. What the specific number of polling locations is yet, we're not sure. But the other thing that does is it helps those poll workers who are there day in and day out. This is very interesting. The more often they do this, the better they get at it. And so they'll be able to help every voter more quickly, more efficiently, and be able to get people in and out of whatever situation they're in to come in and vote as efficiently as possible. And that's the idea, so that we can reduce the amount of time that people are exposed to one another on Election Day, which it looks like we may end up having to do anyway. So our stopgap is going to be really expanding early voting. And this isn't just happening in Arizona, by the way. In many other states where they do have early voting options that extend well before Election Day, like in Arizona, it's 27 days before Election Day. That's when we mail out those ballots. Some jurisdictions are saying, we're going to go 10 days before Election Day, and you're going to vote on your assigned number day. For example, if your Social Security number ends on 1, this is your Election Day. If it ends in 2, this is your Election Day, so on and so forth. That will alleviate the Election Day crowd pretty significantly. In some jurisdictions, they're talking about odd numbered days, odd numbers, even numbered days, even numbers on Social Security to get folks through the line that way. Now, there's no way for us to be able to monitor, but at least that way the citizenry out there can get in and vote and help to reduce those Election Day crowds. And again, that's the goal. So we're going to rely a lot on our voters. We're going to rely a lot on educating the voting public. We're going to rely a lot on political parties and campaigns such as yours to educate voters as we solidify these plans, so that you all out there in the diaspora of election people can help us educate the voters. But that's just a little hint at what we're looking at right now, with no finality to any of the plans just yet.
Great. Thank you so much. That really, I think, clarifies that whole topic of PEVL so much, and really answers a lot of questions for folks who may not either be familiar with it or understand kind of, how we can integrate this process with the early voting, which to me, when you mentioned that earlier, I thought that sounded just like an optimal sort of pairing, because it also works at folks' convenience, right? Nobody has to worry so much about taking time off of work, or, what are we going to do with the kids when we go to vote, or, what if they're sick and they can't go to vote, but they still want to, vote. And it just opens up the possibility for greater turnout. And as you mentioned, we know that in states that have all mail-in, like Oregon and Colorado, I think Utah, and I believe Hawaii is also in there. But I know they have higher turnout, and it's just the easiest thing. It just seems so intuitively user-friendly. So I think having more folks obviously participate in our democracy is always a good thing. At least you would think so. So that being said, I know we talked a little bit about PEVL. Wanted to reiterate to folks a little bit about if you don't mind just mentioning the last date to register for PEVL, and then we wanted to talk a little bit about that independents, how they have to do it in the non-presidential primaries. Just wanted to kind of give a little bit of those logistical details if we could. And also I wanted to mention everybody watching, we will be opening this up to Q&A towards the end. So as you're thinking of any questions, please type them in the chat. We're going to collect all the questions and then we're going to answer them to the best of our ability afterwards. So please, as you're thinking of them, put them in the chat. We will be asking the questions, whether it's to me or to Recorder Fontes. We want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. So that being said, if you want to just elaborate maybe a little bit on those little logistical details, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks so much. So let's start with voter registration because that's where it all starts out. Okay, so every election has its election day, and then we count backwards from that day. So the day before election day is E-1. At E-11, that's the last day you can order a ballot to be mailed to you if you're not on the list. E-27, so 27 days before any election is the day for us to mail ballots out. So we always drop them on E-27, which is the first day of early voting as well.
Right.
And in Arizona, E-29, which is 29 days before any election date, that's the last day to register to vote in that election. So if we look at the calendar, 1, 2, 3, 4, and go back 4 weeks plus 1 is July the 6th. So for the August 4th election, which is the primary election, the last day to register would be Monday, July the 6th.
Okay.
And you'll have already been able to recover from July 4th because that Sunday is the 5th. So 5 p.m., well, actually midnight on July the 6th is where you can, the last day to register. Now, if you have a valid Arizona driver's license, which most adults do over 18, you can go directly to servicearizona.com, which is administered by the Department of Administration and the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, right now, between the 17th, which is yesterday, and the 21st of this month, servicearizona.com is down for a switchover, a big switchover. I think the Department of Department of Administration is doing a big new database thing, and they need a couple of days to get that taken care of. This is a scheduled outage sometime back. Unfortunately, it falls right in the voter registration deadline for folks in Fountain Hills, but that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes. They've got 14,000, almost 15,000 voters up there, which is not a lot when you're looking at the whole county, but when you're looking at Fountain Hills, it's everybody. Right. So that's unfortunate. And if you need to do your voter registration there, we've got forms at maricopa.vote, or you can go to beballotready.vote, which is our website for getting all of that information. Now, so again, I'll reiterate what I just said very quickly. For the August 4th primary election, we count everything in E-minus dates. So 11 days before that is your last day to order an early ballot if you're not on the permanent early vote list. 27 days before any election day is the day we mail out those early ballots and when early voting begins at our various locations. And you can find that information again at beballotready.vote. And then 29 days before the election is the last day to register to vote for that election. And again, for the August 4th primary, that's July the 6th. Now, in Arizona, we have closed primary elections. That means that while independents or non-party designated voters can vote, they have to pick a ballot. And you've got to let us know. So Republicans will automatically get sent their Republican primary ballot, and they're not eligible to vote in the Democratic primary. Democrats will get their ballot, and they're not eligible to vote in the Republican primary. But we don't send ballots automatically to independent voters. And the reason is they got to pick which one to send that they want sent to them. And so we will make sure that in our public campaigns, our public information campaigns, we'll be letting independents know exactly how they can make that happen and what their deadlines are for that. And so for the primaries, particularly in early voting, we do expect to see a good number of independents coming out, and they will be able to, at any of our polling locations, pick which ballot they want. Now, one other thing that I didn't mention in the last little piece was that this year's model will be a vote anywhere, vote center model for Maricopa County. Mm-hmm. That doesn't apply in Pinal County or some of the other counties in Arizona. They don't have the technological capacity yet because they hadn't prepared those systems before for funding issues or whatever. But in Maricopa County, we anticipate that you will be a vote anywhere, vote center type of location, so you won't have one specific place to vote. I think I covered what you needed, Hiral. Otherwise, let me know.
No, you did. Thank you, Adrian. And I wanted to just note something that you had mentioned there about, the date for the last day that you can register to vote, which you said is E-29, if I'm not mistaken. Related to that, a lot of folks obviously have talked about, same day registration, voter registration. I know this is getting a little off topic, but I do want to just hear your thoughts on any other ways that we can act, thoughtfully going forward. Obviously, it's probably after this pandemic crisis right now, about other ways that we can continue to encourage more access, easier access, and unlimited or unfettered access to the ballot box. So hold on to that question for a second. And then I also wanted to just mention that we did get a couple of questions that I think might be really timely to answer right now. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and ask you this. There's a question. It's from Becky. And she says, I am out of state during the summer, during the primary election, as so many Arizonans are. We know this. Is there any way my Pevel ballot can be forwarded to another state? And then Cheryl asks if folks have to register vote by mail like Pevel, or are we talking auto mail out to every? I'm trying to figure out what she's saying there. Do they have to register vote by mail like Pevel? Or are we talking auto mail out to every reg voter? Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah. So I'll answer that one. So Cheryl, Pevel is permanent early voting list. So that means you get a ballot mailed to you, and you're on that list. And so you'll get a ballot mailed to you for the primary, for the general. And that is all mail-in. So you just fill it out, you mail it back. There's no issue. You don't have to register separately as a vote by mail. Pevel is our vote by mail. So I will hand it over to Adrian to address the first question, which I know probably pertains to a lot of Arizonans who are not in the state during the election. So take it away, Adrian.
Thanks. Yeah, and just to reiterate what Hiral said on the last piece, the proposal for 2020 would be we're not adding anyone on to Pevel if they're not already on the list. We would just proactively mail everybody out their ballots. And if you wanted to be on Pevel, that would be something different. Okay. Normally, when you register to vote, you can check the box and automatically be on Pevel. In this circumstance, just for August and November, the proposal is to send everyone a ballot. You would not have to sign up additionally for this one. So that, just to kind of put a point on that one. Now, as to the other question that I think Becky had was your early ballot out of state. Let's say you're doing, a semester overseas, semester abroad, which ain't happening much nowadays, or you have another home in another state that you're at temporarily, and you're snowbirding, I think was what I was looking for.
That was
here in Arizona, more than you are elsewhere. Look, we already do that. Now, the background is election mail does not get forwarded if it has a ballot in it. Now, it's a security measure. The post office knows this. They will not forward a ballot. Information from a registrar, a recorder, an election clerk, things like that, information from us, checking in from us, using NCOA or any of those other mail sort of checking the status to maintain the integrity of the list stuff, that does get forwarded on purpose. So that's really sort of the start of this. Now, if you are in, let's say, Milwaukee for the summer, and you were supposed to get back on August 15th for the August 29th election, but you're not going to be here to get that piece of mail, you can ask my office to mail your ballot to Milwaukee for that one election. Okay? So if you are a permanent early vote list voter, but you're going to be sort of double absentee, in other words, you won't be at your house, you'll be somewhere else, we will forward that mail. We even forward those pieces of mail overseas if necessary. Right. Some people are working jobs where for a period of time they'll be overseas on some government assignment. We have our military uniformed overseas civilian voter act. Those UOCAVA voters who get their ballots overseas all the time in every election that we have. So we will make arrangements with you, and I will give you a phone number right now that you can talk to folks at. Normally you can go to beballotready.vote, which is our sort of the drop page. Beballotready, BEBALLOT, red, just all three words, beballotready.vote. That's where you go for that information. Or you can call 602-506-1511. I'll repeat that, 602-506-1511 is our general number. That's the Star Call Center. It's kind of a switchboard for the county. And if they don't have the answer for you immediately, they'll get you somebody. I do want to point something out, by the way. For the PPE in 2016, the average wait time on the phone was something like 700 seconds in 2016. Yeah. Now, 700 seconds is a long, long time. In 2020, the last PPE, the average wait time was 7 seconds. So we reduced wait times on the phone because we anticipated an enormous amount of calls. We found a whole bunch of extra people to be able to pick up the phone and help people solve their problems. And we really got prepared to make it a voter first, sort of voter experience centric election. And we did that in partnership, obviously, with the Board of Supervisors. But I'm on the board for the Star Call Center. They did a bang-up job. And so don't forget, no matter what, that number, 602-506-1511, is a great place to get a lot of these elections type of questions answered. If they can't do it, they'll send you over directly to the election department. So I think that covers those two. Hiral, what do you got next?
Yeah. You're like, let me at them. I'm ready for the next one, Coach. I love your enthusiasm, Adrian. Thank you. And we will add some of these website links and phone numbers to our assistance page, folks, just because obviously we want to make sure with elections coming up, it's related to this current crisis. We want to make sure people have all the information they need so they can participate in our democracy. So if you missed the number, we'll reiterate it at the end, but we'll also have it on the website. So Adrian, I appreciate all that information and wanted to talk a little bit about, so we talked about independence, we talked about folks who want to, need a different address and so forth. I wanted to talk a little bit about the, some of the arguments that are out there, right, that we're hearing about why folks are opposed to vote by mail. Because I see it as overall a very good thing. It seems more easily accessible, user-friendly, convenient. It has higher turnout. These are things we've already touched on. And the idea should be to have as many voters as possible come out and have their voices heard. So that being said, knowing that, what are some of the arguments that you're hearing come back at you? I mean, I think some of these we've heard, time and time again, but let's sort of break up some of those myths of people talking about voter fraud and other nonsense. Because to me, I think mail-in ballots, paper ballots, obviously, there's no hacking, all of that. we have, signature verification. It just seems like you guys have thought about so many ways to secure the integrity of these elections and these processes. Just touch base a little bit on some of the pushback you're getting, or what are some of those arguments, and can we maybe bust up some of those myths and get the facts out there so folks understand that it actually is a very safe way to vote.
Sure, and that's a great question. Now, you'll allow me to shirk it just a little bit, because there's just some arguments that don't deserve any more oxygen than they're already getting. Let's talk about just some of the high level questions, right? That voting by mail is rife with fraud. It's bad for the integrity of democracy. It's all of these bad things. First and foremost, there's no evidence to prove any of that. Right. And we've never seen any evidence of either widespread voter fraud or the like. And I don't always look backwards very much, but when you really look to the history of ballot by mail voting and the way folks really have looked at this, my predecessor was a huge advocate of expanding the early vote list and helping people vote by mail. And I am a huge advocate as well. And it's pretty clear we were members of different political parties, and so I don't like to lean on that too much, but the reality is there aren't any really good arguments against what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. They're just not. So I'm not going to pay too much attention to that stuff, because here's the funny thing. These critics, almost all of them vote by mail. Almost all of them get their ballot in the mail, mm-hmm. and then they send it into my office after having signed it, and they trust their vote mm-hmm. to this system. Right. Which makes their arguments, I think spurious is generous. So let's kind of just leave it at that. But I do want to run back to one thing that you mentioned earlier, and a couple of other issues that you wanted to talk about. I'll just hit on them really fast so we can get some more mm-hmm. of those questions. And you talked about maybe the expansion of voting rights through either same-day voter registration or automatic voter registration. Mm-hmm. And if I can, let me just touch on both of those really fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of those would be vast improvements to the system that we have now for voters. Mm-hmm. And both of them would really alleviate a lot of concerns that the erstwhile critics have. Let me give you an example. One of the things that people are worried about is the Fed-only voter, and they don't have to prove citizenship to be able to cast a ballot for federal office. Well, I understand the concern. I don't think it's an unreasonable concern. I don't think it's a good concern, but hey, you can make an argument. Okay, well then why don't we just have automatic voter registration, which I like to call authentic voter registration, and here's why. Because I already have the capacity, mm-hmm. not the direct legal authority or access, but I have the capacity to utilize more databases and more information to help clean up my voter rolls, to make sure that the people that are registered and getting ballots are actually A, citizens, and B, alive. And I could do that more dependably, more economically, mm-hmm. and more quickly if we had authentic voter registration. Right. Some people call it automatic voter registration. Mm-hmm. But when you say automatic, there's a group of people out there who don't like the idea that you automatically get your rights. They think you got to fight for them every time. Well, I understand. Okay, that's fine. The reality is, if you want more secure voter rolls, you want cleaner voter rolls, you want more authentic voter rolls, then you have to support automatic or authentic voter registration. There's just no bones about it. Because we have the capacity to have much, much, much better voter registration rolls. We're prevented by law right now from doing that. So the arguments against it are about bringing more people onto the voter rolls, but and then they say there's too many people who don't belong there. I would have to have just the right people on my voter rolls if I could do it. And I don't think people understand the systems enough when they're making criticisms. Now, the other thing that people sometimes get the two conflated a bit is same-day voter registration. That's a different question. But really what it comes down to is the 29 days before Election Day time period would become the day of Election Day. Mm-hmm. Now, why would that be important? Well, that would be important because we're a very transitory environment here in Arizona. People move in and out of different counties. People move in and out of this state all the time. But if you can show that you're a citizen living in the state on the day that you cast your ballot, why shouldn't you have your vote? Right? And so with automatic voter registration, we can do that. Now, in the past, we didn't have the technological capacity because we weren't connected by the internet to databases over secure VPNs with encryption. We have that now. We can automatically see if someone's voted, when they voted, whether they're eligible, and so forth. So doing same-day voter registration and authentic or automatic voter registration, those two things would expand and contract a little bit our voter rolls. It would expand them to keep everybody who's eligible on the voter rolls. They would all be able to vote their full ballot, which is what everybody wants. I heard Kelly Townsend saying that's exactly what she wanted, and that's great too. But also same-day voter registration would include those folks who are here and who could show that they were here. And it would take off of the voter rolls folks that we could show don't belong there in the first place.
Right.
And isn't that really what everybody wants?
Right.
I mean, that's what I thought anyway. So, let's not look at things for what somebody is barking about them being. Let's look at things for what they actually are and analyze the data and the facts as we make our policy decisions. That's really what I'm advocating for.
Well, I completely second that motion. I am all about data and having a data-driven approach, and I applaud you. I appreciate the fact that some of these things just don't need any oxygen because they are not founded in fact. So thank you for that answer. I wanted to, you kind of alluded a little bit to this earlier, and I heard that there is a specific deadline by which if we're going to go to all mail-in, then there's a deadline by which that decision has to be made to make sure we lay down the infrastructure, we have the capacity, we have all the sort of pieces in place to do that. And I imagine that date is either upon us or possibly has just passed. But I'd like you to address that. But I also wanted to just mention, you talked about, I know there are some folks that are strictly opposed or for this based on party lines, but I want to remind people that, we're not talking about more Democrats voting or more Republicans voting or more independents, but we're talking about just more Arizonans, more Americans voting, more registered voters actually participating in our elections. That is a good thing. We want more more of their voices heard. We want more people engaging with the process, more people to feel like their voice matters, because we know that it does. We know that every single vote can make a difference, and we've seen that in some very close elections in the past few cycles. So I wanted to reiterate the fact that there are governors out there, like I believe the Ohio governor, Governor DeWine, who recently came out and spoke very positively and proactively about voting by mail for his state. And so this is not something that should be partisan. This is something that should absolutely be, it seems like it should be embraced by folks regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, because it's about making sure that your right to vote is secure and that every other registered voter's right is secured as well. That's the core of our democracy. So if we truly want to have the strongest democracy, I think that the only way to get there is to make sure that everybody engages. So now that I'll get off my soapbox on that. But if you want to just mention any specific dates, do we have a deadline? Have we passed it? Is this still a possibility?
So the short answer is yes, it is still a possibility. We had originally looked at April 15th, but we made that date our deadline when we were about a month and a half or two ago. Since then, things have changed. The type of information that we have is a little bit different, and we always know that that's the case. We are dealing with an uncertain industry. We have supply chain issues. We usually want to give some pretty conservative estimates early on so that we can be absolutely certain that we're getting things done just the right way. And so we had indicated that April 15th was about our cutoff deadline. We're past that a couple days. I still think we've got a couple days that we can go. I haven't spoken with the election director either for early voting or for election day yet, but I know that our printer, our contractor, really wants to be able to accommodate us and is willing to, the conversation last week was they're willing to shift around some of their print jobs to be able to accommodate Maricopa County. So I think we've bought at least a couple of days in that regard. And so what I'd like to do, and what I've asked people to do in a video that we published earlier, late yesterday afternoon and early this morning, is ask folks to go to azgovernor.gov, and that's one word, azgovernor.gov. And what we're asking folks to do is just ask Governor Ducey the following question. And I wrote it down so that I would say it the same every time. And that is, please let counties decide if they can use ballot by mail. We're not asking the governor to stick his neck out other than to say, leave it up to the county boards of supervisors. Let the boards of supervisors in each county decide for their communities what is best for them, given their circumstances. We don't know what the ground game is going to look like. We don't know what the logistics are or the preparations in other places. I think we do have a few more days, but every single day it gets exponentially harder and further away from being able to do what we know is the safest, healthiest alternative for Arizona's voters. And now, if we don't get it, we're still going to do everything we can to keep Arizona's voters safe, but we're still going to have to find poll workers that want to engage in this. We're still going to have to find facilities, which we're having kind of a rough time doing. And so azgovernor.gov is the place to talk to Governor Ducey. Let him know that we'd like counties to be able to decide whether or not they'll be able to go and mail everyone a ballot before Election Day.
Great. Thank you so much, Adrian. I'd like to touch a little bit about something we're hearing recently in the news about the post office, our United States Postal Service. Essentially, because of obviously a huge drop in mail volume with so many businesses being closed and so forth, that they are concerned that if they do not get any additional funding, that they will, I believe, they'll have to shut down sometime in June. Obviously, that would put a huge kink in, that would obliterate the ability to have mail-in election here. I know that they're saying that it could be as early as June if they don't get any kind of infusion of support. There was a recent bill we know about the CARES Act that did have some funding, but it wasn't enough. And I think people just need to realize that this is going on because this is so important. Obviously, it's not just important for the election. Look, the Postal Service is incredibly vital to the function of our communities, of our state, of our nation. It's how, a lot of people still pay bills, obviously correspondence. Even though a lot of folks do things automatically online, it's still a very integral part of how we communicate, conduct business, pay bills, communicate, personally, right? I mean, and there are a lot of folks who are more vulnerable if that element was removed, if the United States Postal Service was not able to function at full capacity. So I wanted to just mention that that is an issue. Funding is necessary, and it's not even just the funding to keep it going, but let's remember too that it's not something that is just a sort of a disposable part of our government. It doesn't, the slack isn't picked up by all of the private, other entities that deliver. And let's remember, too, that the Postal Service, I want folks to be mindful that it employs about 500,000 Americans. And a lot of those folks are people of color. There's a lot of older workers. There's a lot of folks who are veterans that are employed by the Postal Service. So that is so important that we are aware that, we're talking about 500,000 additional people that could potentially be harmed by that. We need to keep the Postal Service working. We have to infuse the necessary funding. Again, it's about priorities. I know we talk about this a lot on other issues, but if we can afford to give, corporations huge bailouts, and let's remember about the big tax cuts that we gave a couple years back that did not, impact the average American. We have to prioritize such integral parts of our functioning communities, and the Postal Service is certainly one of them. And obviously in this context, it's about how it would impact our elections, which is obvious. But beyond that, it would have a huge impact. And I just want folks to know about it. You can reach out to your elected officials, your congressperson, your senators. Please reach out. Let them know that you think it is important that the United States Postal Service is funded, and that we need to call for more funding as soon as possible, because we're looking at potentially having it shut down in June if we do not address this urgently. So that's just something I wanted to sort of do as a reminder to folks. And then I wanted to touch base real quickly, Adrian, on some of the federal funding proposals that have been put out really quickly, if we can touch base, and then we'll take more questions about some of the federal proposals that have been out there in the last few days to really put more money towards potential all mail-in voting in November. I know Senator Kamala Harris put out something called the Vote Safe Act of 2020, and I know Speaker Pelosi has put something forward. I think there was some amount that was put in the last piece of legislation. I believe it was only $400 million, but they're saying that they would need somewhere between $2 to $4 billion, and that would be obviously for the whole country. So, but if you want to just touch briefly on what that would mean for even just for Maricopa County to make sure that we have the funding necessary if we do go to all mail-in.
Well, and that's interesting that the formula for distribution of these funds really, and the timing of it really makes it too late no matter what we do, right? As far as 2020 goes, if we were going to properly fund the 2020 election, even without COVID-19, we would have had to have these infusions of funds probably at the latest by January or even December of last year. So while it's welcome and it will help with infrastructure down the road and maybe some immediate costs, it's, Congress has given us too little too late. Moreover, really the agency that should be looking at distributing these funds and administering these funds is the Elections Assistance Commission. The EAC is an independent commission created back in the early 2000s with appointees of right now both the Trump and Obama administration. They're nonpartisan. They're really phenomenal, and they're great for helping establish protocols and move forward resources and help local election administrators, not just state election regulators. Mm-hmm. So the EAC needs to be fully funded as well. Yes, in the COVID-3 bill, I want to say, which was the third emergency bill that you talked about, it was $400 million that was granted. It will help. I can tell you that. It's going to help at some stage of the game because counties like Maricopa can make some investment. There's a drawdown amount of money that we have to spend, and then there's a match that comes in some of the formulas. My budget people are a lot smarter on the particulars than I am, so I won't get too much into the specifics of it for fear of misspeaking. But at the end of the day, the number that you mentioned, $2 to $4 billion nationwide, is really the next best step. The problem is these funds end up coming in fits and starts. Mm-hmm. They're not sustained and sustainable, and that's the biggest problem we have. The United States of America has 3,144 counties and parishes. Mm-hmm. Each one has its own independent set of regulations, systems, administrators, infrastructure, the way they look. Cook County, Chicago, you'd think is one of the biggest counties. It's two separate voting jurisdictions. The city of Chicago is distinct from non-Chicago proper insofar as voting jurisdiction is concerned. Mm-hmm. That's why Maricopa County is number 2 behind Los Angeles County, not number 3, because of that split. The boroughs of New York, while they're all the same city, each borough is really its own county when it comes to elections administration. They do their own thing in Queens, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, and so forth. And so you've got all kinds of different needs in all kinds of different places. Now, in Arizona, for example, Maricopa County, we're huge, but we've got some counties in Arizona where the county recorder's office has 3 people in it, and that includes the elected official. And so the amount of work, the type of work, the needs are as varied as the size, scope, and appearance of the counties themselves. So there is no magic silver bullet.
Right.
We are diverse and diffuse in our way of being as a nation, and that's really what makes the United States of America unique and wonderful and complicated. And so when we look at these things, it's really hard to say, here's what we need and here's how we need it as just a general rule, because it won't always apply.
Yeah.
Do we need more funds? Yes. Do we need unlimited funds? No, of course not. But we've got to maintain our posture, and we've got to maintain safety. Now, just a month and a half, 2 months ago, if you asked me what the biggest concerns were, I would have said misinformation and disinformation from our foreign adversaries and some of our folks who the vote deniers here in the United States. Some of that hasn't changed, but now we're dealing with the virus. And now we're dealing with an extra layer of complication. And so, we do need the help. We need more help. And we also need localized solutions with a friendly federal administrator. And we've got the infrastructure ready to go. I just hope that Congress will figure out that locals need different things, states need different things, and there's got to be one central clearinghouse for how all of that works. And we're already set up that way. The Elections Assistance Commission needs to be fully funded. So it's not just us. There's a systemic solution that I think a lot of people have recognized, including folks like Liz Howard out at the Brennan Center, including Amber McReynolds and Vote at Home Institute, including some other election administrators like myself, Dean Logan in Los Angeles, Diane Trotman in Houston, and I could just go on and on and on. Our partners over at the Department of Homeland Security, NOAA, and even some of the folks at the EAC. This is a team of folks who we know each other, we talk to each other, we understand one another's issues, and we've been working together for a long time. This added layer of urgency really helps bring focus into something that's needed a bigger solution for a while. So hopefully we can get there.
Yes. Did that work? Is that okay? Hold on. Okay, wait, hang on. Stay where you are. Okay, I think I did it right. I just wanted to make sure that everybody could still see and hear. So we're going to go to some questions, and but real quick, I wanted to just reiterate something that you just mentioned, which I am so glad you did, because it is all about, this idea that you said they're giving too little too late. It's this frustration I have on so many issues, not just on the elections and the voting process, but about not being proactive. And Congress, unfortunately, there's too many folks in D.C. that I just don't think fully appreciate the idea of looking forward, anticipating problems, thinking of how we could mitigate those issues and act now so that later on we have less hurdles, and it ends up being more cost effective usually when you prevent the fire than when you're putting out the fire later on. That goes for, these election issues. That goes for obviously dealing with a global pandemic. So I just want to thank you for mentioning that I think being proactive in legislation and in thoughtful policy, it's applicable to every issue out there. So thank you. I'm going to give a question to you, Adrian, that's being asked. It's by somebody named, it's by David, and David is asking, do you have any strategies to encourage people to mail in their ballot once they have it? He's asking maybe some commercials on TV, radio, or social media reminding people to mail in their ballots. And David, thank you for that question, because that is a great question. I know I have chased ballots often, and we want people to mark their ballot. We do want them to send it in. So let's see if Adrian has some suggestions for that.
Well, thanks for that question. We'll do these rapid fire so we can get through a bunch of them. The answer is yes, we do have a strategy. We've got a public information strategy that obviously has evolved a little bit since we're in this sort of post-COVID environment, or during, I don't know what you call it. Anyway, we do have a strategy. It includes a guy you may have recently met named Phil the Ballot. I don't know if you've met him. If you haven't, go to BeBallotReady.vote. BeBallotReady.vote was created not just for the presidential preference election, but for the primary and the general and moving beyond that. So BeBallotReady.vote is going to be sort of the focus, and it's going to be where we get all of that, whether it's TV, newspaper, radio, digital, various forms. That's where we're going to be launching all that from, and that's where that's sort of the strategy is going to center around that messaging. So look forward to that. Okay. You may have already seen it for the PPE. That will continue in earnest and in different chunks as we get towards Election Day and beyond.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. And I wanted to just clarify, you're using the term PPE. We're hearing the term PPE very often these days, different entity. You're referencing the presidential preference election. In context of COVID, we talk about personal protective equipment. So just so that there's no confusion of what these little acronyms are being thrown around. Second question, Greg has asked, while hopefully in-person voting will be as low as possible in August and November because of the coronavirus crisis and because of PEVL, can you please ensure that whatever sites are selected for in-person voting and ballot drop-offs, that they will have adequate automobile access and parking?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is engage personal valet service. No, I'm just kidding. I'm being facetious. Look, the difficulty that we have, as I've indicated before, is that we don't own the vast majority of our locations. Mm-hmm. Adding to that difficulty is the fact that there's a lot of institutions and organizations now that just don't want us using their space because of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And so right now I'm working with directly with Phoenix Mayor Gallego. We're getting on the horn with city clerks around Maricopa County and other municipal and organizational institutions. I'm hoping we'll be able to get maybe some of the professional franchises involved. Look, it's all hands on deck to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And so parking hopefully will not be an issue. I agree with that part of the sentiment, but we are doing everything in our power to make sure that this election functions well. And we are cognizant, very cognizant of the fact that primary day in August of 2020 falls right squarely in the middle of the beginning of monsoon season, which is not a comfortable time to be standing outside in line. Mm-hmm. Trust me, we will be using that as a motivator to get people to either vote early or to vote by mail. So we have multiple layers to the strategy of keeping from having parking problems at our polling places.
Great. I like that you're being proactive, thinking about that. So another question is from Becky. She asks, how can we petition the governor? And I think you've referenced that. She's asking about how to petition the governor to expand vote by mail. I know that you've already touched on the fact that we can go to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but azgovernor.gov. And you're encouraging folks to go to that site. So Becky, you can go to that site, azgovernor.gov, and basically just put in the question or the statement that we please let counties decide on their own individually about vote by mail. So I think that kind of answers. Somebody is saying that the. Well, hang on one second. I'm going to let you answer that, and then I think there's a question about that site. Is it azgovernor.gov or is it arizonagovernor.gov?
Well, when I Googled it, the tag on top was azgovernor.gov. It might be arizonagovernor.gov. But if you Google AZ Governor, the site will be one of the top ones. And that's one of the ways that you can communicate directly with Governor Ducey and let him know. But that does not mean, preclude you from contacting your state house representative, from your state senator. This is a all hands on deck issue. So please reach out to those folks who are helping to make these decisions and supporting this. And look, I know, Hiral, probably a good chunk of your audience is going to be independents and Democrats. But look, if there's Republicans watching, this is you too. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a lot more Republicans on the permanent early vote list and there are a lot more Republicans who are not on the permanent early vote list who we would be sending ballots to if this plan worked. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking at it from a partisan perspective, exclusively, what I'm doing doesn't help my side of the aisle very much, because the proportion of Republicans who don't vote on election day is larger than the proportion of Democrats who don't vote on election day. And the turnout is more if you give them a ballot in the mail. And so statistically, we've heard from folks that if Arizona and Utah and Florida went to ballot by mail, it wouldn't be super huge, but statistically, it would be a little bit of a nudge politically to the right. Now, is that going to make a big difference in any one particular race? I don't care.
Right.
I want people to stay healthy. That's what's motivating this. So I'm excited about folks contacting Governor Ducey. I'm excited about folks taking their democracy into their own hands and helping us cheer that governor on into letting the boards of supervisors make those decisions.
Great. No, thank you. I think that those are great reminders, and I mean, I could not agree with you more. This is not a partisan issue. This is about everybody being able to safely participate in the democratic process and exercise their right to vote. This is not about, strengthening turnout one way or the other. And as you mentioned, if every single Arizonan that is registered to vote did get out there to vote, there'd be more Republicans, which that's it. And that's it. That's what happens. And however they vote, they vote. But the point is, we want everyone to be part of this process. We want everyone to be able to exercise their right to vote and do it in a safe way. And I would just, compare this. Somebody asked me the other day, why is this such a big deal? You could, you're just standing in line. You're not like, you don't have to engage with people, whatever. I mean, imagine if we said, hey, why don't you go ahead and go into a movie theater right now? Why don't you go ahead and go into a small, auditorium to watch a concert or a play? I mean, most people, I think, are going to say, no, that's too risky. This is the same concept. There's no reason that you're going to have to go see a concert, or there's no reason you're going to have to go to the movie theater. But most people want to make sure that they vote. They want to make sure their voice is heard. They want to make sure that their vote is cast. They want to be part of the process. And we cannot allow folks to have to make that choice of being safe and healthy or being able to exercise that right to vote. So all of this is about protecting people's health and safety and well-being, and being very mindful that the precautions we have in place now are going to probably be in some shape or manner still be present when it comes time for the primary and maybe even for the general. And whatever we can do now to be prepared so that everybody can vote is going to be better for our democracy. So thank you for all that you've shared. I want to mention there's another question. And folks, if you do have any more questions, please make sure you type them in that chat box. I know we're getting a little over time, but I want to make sure we share information that is so important to folks. Sonali has a question about the stay-at-home order. So I'm going to answer that real quickly. With planned protests, she asked, with planned protests, do you think the governor will give in? And if so, how can we protect ourselves if we are made to go back to work? I don't think we're ready to be lax on the stay-at-home order. Sonali, I agree with you. We are not ready to be lax on the stay-at-home order. And that is something that is fairly consistent across the board. And this is a question that should be answered only by medical professionals. This is an issue of medical safety, and the only folks who truly know what is safe are the folks who have the experience, the healthcare workers who are in the front line, who see the vulnerable cases, the virologists who understand how this virus is, how contagious it is, how it acts, what its trend lines could be based on previous pandemics, and then the epidemiologists who understand the most vulnerable populations and how we've managed these crises in the past, although granted they have been on a smaller scale. So I want to remind people, look, we understand there are economic stresses out there. The impact of this has not been lost on anybody about understanding that small businesses are closed, people are not working, they're not bringing in a paycheck. And our everything we're talking about as far as encouraging legislation and talking to your elected representatives, it's all about making sure that we are providing that economic security, that economic safety net for those folks during this time of crisis, because it is incredibly stressful, and it's such a huge worry for millions of families across this country. But that being said, it would be foolish for us to let our guard up when we're actually starting to see progress and thinking that, okay, it's safe now, and then seeing another wave or all these hotspots being created, and then it undoes all the work we've done, and it essentially makes all the sacrifices that we've all made, and we've all made them. I know you've all made them. It's going to make those be in vain, because we don't want to go back to square one. And we don't know enough information yet, and that is basically it's the biggest piece of that is we need more testing. We need more testing. We don't just need to test folks who have symptoms. We need to test folks who are asymptomatic, because right now we are probably at a 1/5 of the testing level that we should be at if we are looking for this trajectory of eventually being able to ease regulations over the next month or so. We are not there. So anything you can do to remind our elected officials that we need more tests so we can safely reopen our communities, that is what I would encourage you to do. I don't want to put anybody at additional risk. We don't want to let up on these guidelines and potentially see a resurgence of this virus, more loss of life, more morbidity. That's not something that any of us are willing to take a chance on. I don't think you or I want to risk ourselves or our family members or our friends, our children. So please be mindful that we are not minimizing the economic implications, but we have to be very cautious in reopening our communities, and that means letting the medical benchmarks guide us. And right now we are not where we need to be with those benchmarks, and the first part of that is we need to expand the infrastructure of our testing. So I hope that answered your question, Sonali. And then I think part of that was, how do you protect yourself? I mean, I'm hoping that this does not happen. Obviously, personal protective equipment. We don't want to take things away from frontline healthcare workers, but at this point, the CDC recommends that we are wearing masks when we are out. If you are in any way put in that position, which I hope you are not, that is, what I would reiterate to folks. But I mean, again, nobody should be taking this kind of chance. You are risking other people's lives as well as your own. We have to let the medical data and experts guide us. And I would plead with Governor Ducey and with any other elected officials to make sure that that is the only criteria by which they are making these decisions. We have another question. This is for you, Adrian. Kathy asks, is there a strategy for citizen election board workers like me, like Kathy, when they process the ballots? When they have partners who are sitting close, are there specific strategies that you will have in place, such as face masks and shields, etc.? So I will pass it over to you.
Yeah, and first of all, I want to thank Kathy. If it's the Kathy I'm thinking of, she gets thanks for a lot of stuff because she does a lot for a lot of people. But the fact that you are on a citizen board puts you in a unique place. In 2018, citizen boards processed 1.2 million ballots as part of that general election. So they did a hell of a lot of work, and we're very grateful to them. That having been said, they work in pretty close proximity to one another because the work that they do is at least bipartisan. You have to sit as a citizen board with a member of another party to do the work of taking the ballot out of the envelope. That gets done by hand, and it gets done by Democrats and Republicans, or Republicans and Libertarians, or Greens and Independents, or whoever. You have to be registered with a different political party, and you take the oath and all that stuff. So there's a lot of integrity in the mail system, and it's because of folks like Kathy and counterparts on the other side of the aisle from her Now, as far as our personal safety is concerned, that's one of our biggest concerns right now. Because we know this is so people-driven, and we know that people are the vectors for transmission of this virus, we've got to pay very close attention. So without getting too specific into the protocols, we've gone so far as considered splitting up the entire workforce into 2 or 3 separate areas, going to completely separate shifts with smaller numbers of people, and a various other sets of strategies that will make the number of people working in the same space at the same time smaller, in case, unfortunately, somebody does actually contract the virus and test positive. Everybody they've been in contact with is going to have to go into quarantine. We can't lose the entire crew at once. Right. And so in order to reduce that possibility, we're looking at a whole bunch of different possible strategies, and every single one does include lots and lots of other precautions individually. Everything from where you check in, how to check in, which restroom facilities get used, what kinds of stuff people can bring in for meals. We're thinking about the possibility, if we can get the funding for it, of providing meals so that folks aren't bringing a whole bunch of their own food stuff and food containers in to the same spaces. We're thinking about all of those things. And so, Kathy, first, thank you for what you do. Second, encourage other people to do it too. And third, know that it's not going to be easy, but we're going to do everything we can to keep all of our folks safe who do that work, because you all are the unsung heroes of election administration, sitting there, ballot after ballot, envelope after envelope, ensuring the security and integrity of that ballot by mail system. That happens by regular citizens, by the way. So that'll kind of answer that one, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Adrian. So, and then it looks like we just have a couple more questions, and oh, I'm sorry. So we have another question for you, Adrian. Katie Solon says 10,000s, or I guess tens of thousands of Arizonans live outside the U.S. What voting challenges do you see for them this year? And I think she just notes that she really appreciates being able to register to vote and request ballots and submit ballots by email. So, but her specific question is, what voting challenges do you see for them this year? So if you have thoughts on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the Uniform and Civilian Overseas Voting Act, UOCAVA, really does provide us with a lot of flexibility for our overseas voters. There are a handful, and by a handful I mean just a couple of hundred out of the more than 4,000 overseas voters that we have left, who are still depending on mail for their ballots where they are. We're trying to contact them to transfer them over to electronic style ballots, which falls within the law, particularly if folks are overseas. There are exceptions in the federal law for those sorts of circumstances. They're not widely available. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is this. Because of the pandemic, not all postal systems around the world are operating at 100%. Mm-hmm. And so the challenges do exist. They're different for all of those voters, however. We have voters on nuclear submarines. We have voters in Afghanistan and in Germany and in South Africa. We have voters on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. We've got voters all over the place. Maricopa County is a big, big, big place. And so if you can think of it, we've got them. We don't have any voters on the International Space Station from Maricopa County, but if we did, I can promise you I'd figure out a way to get them a ballot and get that ballot counted. So we meet those challenges head on. We try to accommodate all of those voters, and I think we've done a pretty darn good job so far.
Yeah, I would agree. Thank you, Adrian, for that, and I love your ambition of being able to get that ballot to the ISS. So there you have it. I think we're going to close. We have one last question that I think we have time for, and then we're going to have to let all of you go. Sherry asked, will we be getting more testing in Arizona? That is a great question, Sherry. And what I can tell you is that A lot of folks are asking for it. Medical professionals, healthcare professionals, public health officials are asking for it. And again, it is only with more testing that we will be able to safely reopen our communities. And the reason the testing is so important is because, and again, this is also for folks who are asymptomatic, because we have to do contact tracing. And we've talked about this in previous town halls, but basically it's the process of testing, finding those people who are positive and immediately isolating them, quarantining them, but then also digging in a little deeper to their history, finding out who they've been in contact with, where they've been, who they've been around, and then immediately contact tracing, identifying those folks, reaching out to them, getting them tested, and potentially being able to limit the creation of a hotspot. And that is what has been successful in other places like South Korea, in Singapore, in New Zealand. That is what we need to be doing here. And again, the benchmarks we're supposed to be meeting before we open up are advancing our level of testing to about 5 times of where we are right now, so that we have a full picture of the number of new cases. We are able to limit the spread. We're able to mitigate the spread. We're able to do adequate contact tracing, which requires an infrastructure of technology. And then on top of it, we have to make sure that our healthcare resources are not overwhelmed and that they are able to see that they are coming back down to normal levels. It is only then that we can safely reopen our economy and our communities. We would like nothing better than to see that happen sooner than later, but we want to do that only if we can do that by keeping people and keep people healthy and safe. It's not something we want to take any chances on. So, Sherry, thank you so much for that question. I'm going to close out my part. I want to let Adrian say a few words here. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. We appreciate these opportunities to connect. We miss all of you. Please continue to check out the website for any updated links and resources and access to services. You can email us at info@hiralforcongress.com if you have any questions related to what we talked about today or anything else related to the COVID crisis or other information you might need. We are here to help. Thank you. Please continue to follow the guidelines. Be safe. Stay healthy. All the best to you and your families, and we cannot wait to see you all sometime very soon. I'm going to hand it over to Adrian for his closing remarks. And again, Adrian, thank you so much to you for all of the information, for all of the time you've put into protecting this electoral process in Maricopa County. You've done an amazing job, and we are so grateful to have you at the helm. So thank you so much. And here is Recorder Fun Test.
Hey, Hiral, I do appreciate the invitation. I do have one caveat that I always talk to, particularly in primaries with folks who are on the ballot, and that is I'm not appearing today in my official capacity. This is the disclaimer part, right? And I am not endorsing any particular candidates across the board, regardless of the office. But that having been said, I wish you well, because I can't really wish you luck. That really does put me in the right spot to be able to say this. We have a fantastic opportunity, and I see challenges as just that, opportunities to thrive, opportunities to show off the talents of the people who are engaged in the problem solving and attacking these problems so that we can find the best solution for the biggest amount of people. That's all we've been doing for the last several years at the County Recorder's Office. We've advanced about 25 to 30 years in the last 3.5 years at the Maricopa County Recorder's Office. And I couldn't be more proud of my staff, the senior staff, all the way down to the folks who are doing data entry. They've all been such great performers, and we've faced every single challenge. And let's not forget, when we started back in 2017, we wanted to go to vote centers. We wanted folks to understand ballot by mail. We wanted to have an advanced voter check-in system to reduce double voting and to make sure to get to all of our voters. We wanted to count every single ballot, which required a new tabulation system. We've achieved every single one of those goals. And it's because of folks like Kathy and all the other people who come to work with us. And it's because of partners and conversations like the one we've just had, Hiral, that you've hosted here. And so I appreciate you. in your efforts, not just as a candidate, but as a leader in the community, and all the other folks that I've been talking to over this new sort of teleconference thing that we're all still, I guess, trying to figure out. I think we've done a pretty good job today. So to all of the viewers out there, please pay attention to what's going on. That's the critical thing. I tell it to my kids all the time. Mm-hmm. Pay attention to what's going on around you, because that's one of the best life lessons there is, particularly when it comes to how we are taking care of and working through these big issues that are literally matters of life and death now. Mm-hmm. So thank you to everyone. I am Adrian Fontes, and since I'm not in my official capacity, I will take the liberty to plug electfontes.com, which is a place where you can go. I know Hiral has other websites she'll probably mention real quick, which I think is great, and I will sign off. Thank you very much, and Semper Fidelis to all current and former Marines out there.
Thank you so much again to Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes for joining us, for all the information, and for the amazing job you and your whole department, your whole staff, everyone is doing down at the County Recorder's Office. So thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you soon, Adrian. Thanks again to everybody for joining. Please continue to be safe. We will put some of these websites and the phone number that Recorder Fontes mentioned as well, so that folks can share their opinion and learn more. We want everyone to be part of the electoral process. Your vote, your voice matters. In the meantime, please take good care, stay healthy, stay safe, follow the guidelines, reach out